Hey everyone, we're going to talk through a problem in rationalizing monomial denominators. So the problem we're going to start with is 8 divided by the square root of 44z. And we want to simplify the radical out of the denominator. Now first you might ask, why do I want to do this? And the short answer is because. The long answer is there are things that you will get to down the road in Algebra 2, in Geometry, in trig, should you decide to do it, where you're really going to want to be able to do more things with these equations, right? And it's impossible to do with the square root of 44z on the bottom. It's just a really tough thing to deal with. So by knowing how to move that out of the denominator and into the numerator, or even to factor it out completely, you're going to give yourself the capability of doing much more intricate problems. So really this is one of those things where you ask why, and the answer is because. Because it is useful down the road. It is not immediately useful to you, and so in that regard it's a little different than some of the other problems that we'll deal with, but it is still relatively simple once you get the hang of it. So we have 8 divided by the square root of 44z. That's going to look like this, 8 divided by the square root of 44z. And so I want to know what's going to cancel out the square root of 44z. We want that to be a regular number in a variable. We don't want the square root in the way. We want to get rid of the square root. And how do you get rid of a square root? Well, let's actually take a look at some squares. So we have, we've made some squares here. I'm going to divide this like so into 16 boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So the inside, we'll make our pen a little bigger here, is 16, right? And the width of the top is 1, 2, 3, 4. And the side is 4. And so what we have is 4 squared equals 16. And another way of writing this relationship, right, because 4 times 4, so when we take a 4 and we make a square out of it, or square it, we get 16. The other thing we might want to do is start with the 16 itself, like we did here. We say, well, what is the root? What's the root of the square of 16? And the answer is, what can we do when we have a square that has 16 units in it? What would be the side length? And that's 4. And that's what the square root means. The square root means is, given a square of area 16, what is the length of a side? And that's 4. Okay? So let's say over here, and we're not going to draw on this one, we're going to say this one has an area of 9. Okay? So this has an area of 9. And that equals what? Equals 3, okay? So we have 3, and we square it, and we get what? We have a side length of 3, and we square it, we get 9, right? But so the other thing to remember is that the square root of 9 is the same thing as 3. So we could say the square root of 3, I'm sorry, the square root of 9, which is 3, squared equals 9. The square root and the square cancel each other out. And that makes sense, right? When you square the square root, I mean, the words go together and everything, so it feels pretty logical. Let's put 44z in here. What would the side length be on a square of 44z? And the answer is the square root of 44z. We don't know, really, because we don't know what z is. So 44z, z could be 1 over 44. So the whole square could have a unit of, area of 1. It could have an area of 4 if it was 1 over 11. It could have an area of, 88 if z was 2. So we don't really know. So we have to retain our variable in the side length as well. So to get from our square root of 44z, if we square that, we're going to get 44z. And that's actually what we're going to be doing. We're going to take the square root of 44z and we're going to square it here so that we can deal with this. So we want to multiply this by square root of 44z. z. Okay? And this is the first step in the actual problem. The rest of it was explanation about why it works. So if you're really just wanting to practice the steps, here's where you start. So we want to multiply the square root of 44z by the square root of 44z to cancel out the square roots. But we can't change the value of this problem. And by multiplying it by 1 over the square root of 44z, we are definitely changing the value. So to prevent that, we're going to put the square root of 44z in the numerator and the denominator. Anything divided by itself is 1, and anything multiplied by 1 is the same thing as it was. So by putting it in the square root of 44z in the numerator and the denominator, we are not changing the value of the problem. That's really, really important. So we're going to end up with 8 square root of 44z. All that over 44z. Okay? This doesn't look any prettier than this. Now we're looking at 44 under the radical. And 44 is the same thing as 4 times 11. And 4 has a square root. The square root of 4 is what? What do you multiply by itself to get 4? If you said 2, you're right. So we have 8 times 2. Well, let's write it like this. 8 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 11z over 44z. So 44 itself is equal to 4 times 11. And then the square root of 44 is the same thing as the square root of 4 times the square root of 11. The square root of 4 is 2. So 8 times 2 times the square root of 11z over 44z. So what can we take out of 44? Well, 44 is the same thing as 4 times 11. 8 is the same thing as 2 times 4. So we can cancel this down to a 2. We can cancel this down to 11. We can simplify, maybe. Might be a better word. Then we end up with 4 square root of 11z over 11z. Now you'll notice this does not look simpler than this. Right? We don't look like we've made it any better. But now when we have this, we can multiply by z to cancel things out. We can multiply by 11. We can divide things by 4. We can divide things by the square root of 11. We can also recombine to get back to the square root of 44 if we need to. We can always do those things in reverse. So this gives us a lot more options. So our answer is 4 square root of 11z over 11z. So we're going to write that in. And you notice I almost always do 4 divided just right away and put in the fractions. It's just easier for me to type in that way. Okay. 4 square root of 11z, all that over 11z. And again, we're always going to click, how did I do? Green box, we've got the right answer. So it's going to go through the steps, just like it always does. Don't forget to check through as you do your first set of problems. Make sure you get really comfortable, and then do them without checking. So.